he gave his last horse to a wounded Apache girl. At sunrise, her sisters came. The first light of dawn spread across the rugged hills, painting the desert in soft gold and pink. The wind carried the faint smell of sagebrush and dust, and the rancher could hear the low, distant calls of birds beginning their day. For him, mornings were always quiet, a time to check on the horses before the heat of the day arrived. He stepped out of his small cabin, the wooden porch creaking under his boots, and looked over his modest herd. The horses grazed calmly, their heads dipping and lifting in rhythm, unaware of the world beyond the fence.
Life on the ranch was simple but hard. Every day demanded work, feeding, watering, mending fences, and making sure the horses were healthy.
But the rancher had grown to love the quiet routine. There was a sense of freedom in the wide open land, a feeling that no one could take away. Still, he had learned long ago to respect the dangers that sometimes came with living so close to the wilderness. Predators, rough terrain, and occasional conflicts with nearby settlements meant that he always had to be careful, especially when traveling beyond his land. That morning, as he walked toward the far end of the pasture, he noticed something unusual. At first, it looked like a shadow on the rocky slope near the ravine. But then he saw movement, jerky, uneven movement, as if someone were struggling. His heart tightened. People didn't often wander there, especially alone. His instincts told him to be cautious, but something deeper urged him to investigate. He adjusted his hat against the rising sun and moved slowly toward the slope.
As he drew closer, the figure became clearer.
It was a young girl, no more than 14 or 15, lying among the rocks and dry shrubs. Her clothes were torn, and a deep gash on her arm was bleeding. Her face was streaked with dust and blood, her dark hair tangled and matted. She tried to lift herself, but her strength was clearly failing. Her eyes, wide with fear and pain, met his for a brief moment before she turned her gaze away. The rancher stopped a few feet away, keeping his hands visible so she wouldn't see him as a threat. He had heard stories of people being suspicious or fearful when strangers appeared, and he didn't want to startle her.
"Hey," he said softly, his voice calm but firm.
"It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." For a moment, the girl didn't respond. But her breathing was shallow, and her body trembled. He could see she was badly hurt, and probably alone.
He knew he couldn't just leave her there, not when someone's life hung in the balance. Carefully, he knelt beside her, taking in the wound.
Blood had started to dry around a deep cut on her forearm, and there were bruises forming along her shoulders and legs. It looked like she had fallen or been in some kind of struggle. "Can you move?" he asked gently. The girl shook her head, unable to speak. He nodded, understanding.
"All right. Don't try. I'm going to help you."
He rummaged through the saddlebag he always carried for emergencies, pulling out clean cloths, some water, and a small first aid kit. He had learned basic first aid over the years, not because he expected trouble, but because accidents happened on the ranch all the time. Carefully, he dabbed the wound, cleaning away the dirt and stopping the bleeding as best he could. He tore a strip of cloth to make a makeshift bandage, tying it snugly but not too tight. But the girl flinched once, but stayed mostly still, her eyes watching him with a mix of caution and curiosity. As he worked, he realized how thin and fragile she was. Her clothes were worn, and her small frame suggested she hadn't eaten well in days. She was exhausted, probably from trying to walk or run despite her injuries. He offered her some water and she drank slowly, barely raising the cup to her lips at first. Her trust was small, but it was there, like a fragile thread between them. "Do you have anywhere to go?" he asked after a while. She shook her head again. He suspected she had no one nearby, or she might have gotten separated from her family. The rancher's mind raced.
Leaving her alone was not an option. There was no way she could make it down the ravine safely in her condition.
He would have to find a way to get her to safety.
The rancher glanced at his horses grazing nearby.
They were strong, healthy, and loyal, but his herd was small. One horse, the strongest and fastest of them all, had been his companion for years. That horse had carried him through harsh winters, rocky trails, and emergencies. Now, he realized if he wanted to save this girl, he would have to risk giving up that horse. It was a hard choice, but he didn't hesitate. He couldn't stand by while she suffered. Gently, he helped the girl to her feet. She leaned heavily on him, wincing at every step. He could feel her trust growing, but it was still delicate. Carefully, he led her toward the horse, speaking softly the entire way. "It's okay. You'll be safe. We'll take it slow." She said nothing, only gripping his arm for support. When they reached the horse, he lifted her onto its back. She flinched slightly at the touch of the saddle but stayed still. He adjusted the reins and climbed up beside her, guiding the horse down the slope carefully. Every step was slow and measured as he balanced the horse's weight on the uneven terrain. Desperate. He felt the girl's tension through her stiff posture, and he whispered reassurance with each step. The sun was rising higher now, casting warm light over the rocky landscape. Shadows stretched across the ground, and the wind carried a quiet promise of a new day. Yet the rancher felt a deep weight in his chest. This simple act of helping someone could cost him dearly. The horse he was riding was not just any horse. It was his most trusted companion, the last of his strongest animals.
Giving it away meant months of hardship, but saving a life was worth far more than comfort or wealth. As they moved through the terrain, he noticed small signs of her life story. She had scratches on her legs from running through thorny bushes, a bruise across her cheek, and tiny remnants of fabric that suggested she had been traveling in a hurry. He didn't press for details. He knew that if she wanted to share, she would. For now, the priority was safety. Despite the danger and the cost, he felt a sense of purpose. Every careful step they took toward safety strengthened his resolve. He understood that real courage was not in the absence of fear, but in action, despite fear. This girl, so small and fragile, had already endured far more than most people could imagine, and now he would help her survive another day. The ride continued for several minutes, each one testing his patience and the horse's strength. He spoke to the girl quietly, telling her stories of the ranch, of the desert, and of the horses. She listened in silence, her eyes slowly losing some of their fear as she absorbed his words. Small glimmers of trust appeared in her gaze, and he knew they were beginning to form a fragile bond. Finally, they reached a flatter, safer area near the edge of the ravine. He guided the horse to a stop and helped the girl down gently. She looked at him, her eyes wide and grateful. She didn't speak, but the small nod of her head said more than words ever could. He understood her perfectly. He looked at the horse, standing patiently, its ears twitching as it sensed the tension. He knew he had made the right choice. This was more than a sacrifice. It was an act of humanity. Saving a life was always worth more than any material possession, and he felt a quiet pride in his heart. As the morning sun climbed higher, the rancher prepared to take the next steps. He would need to find a place where the girl could rest and heal, and he would have to do so carefully. The desert could be unforgiving, and he knew that even small mistakes could have dire consequences. But he felt ready. He had made his choice, and he would see it through.
For the first time that morning, the girl smiled faintly. It was a small gesture, but it told him everything he needed to know.
But she trusted him enough to accept help, and he would honor that trust with every action he took. Together they began the journey down the gentle slope towards safety, their shadows stretching long behind them in the rising sun. Every step was careful, every word measured. Yet there was hope in the air, a quiet promise that this day, which had begun with fear and pain, could also be a day of life and kindness. The rancher guided the horse, feeling the rhythm of its strong legs beneath him. And he thought about how sometimes the most important decisions were the ones that asked the most of the heart. By the time they reached the small clearing at the bottom of the slope, the girl was exhausted but stable. The rancher knew that this was only the beginning. Press. The sun had risen fully, warming the desert and casting everything in light. It felt like a sign, a new day for both of them, a chance to survive and, perhaps, to heal. He took a deep breath and looked at her. "We're not out of danger yet," he said softly. "Bet." She nodded faintly, her eyes following him with quiet trust. He adjusted the saddle once more, readying for the next leg of their journey. Bet. They would face more challenges, but for now they had each other, and that was enough. The rancher's heart felt full, despite the uncertainty. He had done what he knew was right, risking everything he had to save a life. And in that quiet golden light of dawn, he realized something profound. Sometimes helping someone else was the only way to find true strength in oneself. The rancher led the horse carefully across the uneven desert ground, feeling every shift of its strong legs beneath him. The girl clung tightly to him, her small hands wrapped around his waist, her eyes still wary but beginning to trust. The sun was higher now, casting harsh shadows across the dusty terrain, and the air was already warming. Every step had to be deliberate. One false move could send them tumbling down the rocky slopes or into the hidden ravines. He glanced at the girl. Her breathing was shallow, and her pale face told him she was still weak. He had expected that, but seeing it reminded him of the responsibility he carried. This was no longer just about helping someone. It was about life and death. He spoke softly to her, using words more for comfort than instruction. "We'll go slowly. I won't let anything happen to you." Beck. "You're safe now." She didn't reply, only nodded slightly, resting her head against his back. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with understanding, trust, and the shared awareness of the danger around them. The rancher had lived in these hills for years. He knew where the hidden dangers lay, the loose rocks, the thorny shrubs, and the sudden drop-offs. Every decision he made mattered. The terrain grew rougher as they moved farther from his ranch. Sharp stones cut into the horses' hooves, and dry, brittle brush scratched their legs. The girl flinched at every small jolt, and he whispered soothing words, keeping her calm. "Almost there," he said, even though he didn't know how far there was. Breath. Safety was a vague promise, but it was enough to keep them going. He thought about the horse beneath him, the last strong horse he owned. Giving it up was no small thing. This animal had carried him through harsh winters, treacherous terrain, and countless emergencies. Losing it would be difficult, not just practically, but emotionally. Still, he knew there was no choice. Saving a life was worth any sacrifice, and he had already made his decision. As they climbed a small ridge, he noticed the girl's lips trembling. She was trying to speak, but had no strength. "It's okay," he said gently. "You don't need to talk. Just hold on." She nodded, squeezing his waist tighter. He could feel her small frame shivering, not from cold but from weakness and fear. He reached down with one hand to adjust her grip, and she gave a faint, grateful smile. The sun climbed higher, beating down on them with increasing intensity. The rancher was careful to keep the horse moving steadily but slowly, giving the girl breaks when needed. At one point, they came to a small stream, its water shallow but clear. He stopped and helped her drink. She dipped her fingers into the water, washing some of the dirt and blood from her face. Her eyes met his, and for the first time there was a hint of relief, a faint spark of hope. After the short break, they continued. The landscape grew even more challenging. Sharp cliffs rose on one side, while deep gorges threatened every step on the other. The horse navigated carefully, and the rancher guided it with gentle but firm reins. He knew that rushing would be dangerous. Patience was the only way to ensure they both reached safety. As they traveled, the rancher thought about the girl's story, piecing together what he could from the small signs around her. Her clothes were worn and torn, and there were faint traces of blood on her sleeves. Bruises on her arms and legs suggested she had been running or struggling to escape from danger. Bang!
She had likely been alone for some time, and every step she had taken had left her weaker.
Bet. His respect for her resilience grew with every mile they traveled. He noticed her eyes wandering to the horizon, taking in the hills and the desert around them. Perhaps she was remembering home, or perhaps she was simply trying to make sense of the world again. He said nothing, letting her look. Breath. Words were not always needed, and silence sometimes spoke louder than any explanation. Hours passed slowly, but the rancher remained vigilant. He guided the horse carefully over loose rocks and hidden roots, all the while keeping the girl secure. He spoke softly, telling her small stories about the ranch, about the horses, the sunrise, and even about the coyotes that roamed at night. She listened quietly, her fear gradually giving way to cautious curiosity. He could sense that trust was building, that she was beginning to believe that not all strangers wished her harm. The sun reached its peak, and the desert heat became more oppressive. The rancher shaded the girl as best he could with his arm and reminded her to drink small amounts of water frequently. Her strength was fading, and he knew they could not push much further without risking serious harm. They needed a place to rest, to recover even briefly, before continuing. He spotted a small cluster of trees in the distance, a rare sight in the otherwise open desert. Beneath their branches, the ground looked soft enough to rest. But, guiding the horse carefully, he led them toward the shade. Once there, he helped the girl down from the saddle, supporting her weak body with his own. And she sank onto the ground, relief washing over her face, as she took a deep, steadying breath. He removed the bandage from her arm, cleaning it again with what little supplies he had left. The girl flinched but did not protest. He worked slowly, carefully, making sure she felt safe. "Almost done," he said quietly. "You're doing very well." She looked up at him, her eyes bright with a mixture of pain and gratitude. While she rested, he tended to the horse, checking for cuts and ensuring it had enough water. The animal had been loyal and steady through the long journey, and he gave it a moment of attention and praise. It nickered softly in response, as if it understood the importance of what they were doing. As the afternoon sun began its slow descent, the rancher knew they could not stay in one place for too long. The desert could be dangerous, and predators were always a concern. He also knew that the girl's safety depended on reaching a place where others could help her. Slowly, carefully, he lifted her back onto the horse. Bound. She rested her head against his back, weary but trusting. The journey continued, each mile testing their endurance. Breath. The rancher's body ached from guiding the horse and supporting the girl, but he never let his fatigue show. Every time he glanced down at her, he saw the small signs of her determination, her will to survive despite everything she had endured. That determination fueled his own resolve. By late afternoon, they reached a shallow valley where the desert opened into a wider, safer area. Here, the ground was flatter, and the vegetation was thicker. It was a small haven, a place where they could rest more safely and plan the next stage of their journey. The rancher guided the horse into a shaded area near a cluster of shrubs and helped the girl down once more. She sat quietly, looking around with a mix of curiosity and wariness. As they rested, he considered what had brought her to this point. She was clearly part of a family. And yet, something had gone wrong. A fall? An accident? Or perhaps something more dangerous. He didn't know, and he didn't ask yet. For now, the priority was survival, and the bond between them was growing stronger with every careful step, every moment of shared effort. He offered her a small piece of bread he had carried from the ranch, and she took it slowly, nibbling quietly. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. But she was beginning to trust that he genuinely cared for her safety. And in that trust he found a quiet satisfaction, a reassurance that the risks he had taken were worth it. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the valley, the rancher knew they needed to find a more permanent, safe place soon. He scanned the horizon, looking for signs of settlements or familiar landmarks. The girl's survival depended on getting her somewhere she could recover fully, somewhere her family might find her. And he would do everything in his power to get her there. The ride had been long and exhausting, yet it was far from over. Every step had required careful thought, patience, and courage. The girl had endured far more than most could imagine, and he had witnessed a strength in her that inspired him. She was small, fragile, and wounded, yet her spirit remained intact, and that spirit became a beacon guiding him forward. By the time twilight approached, they had reached a place that seemed safer, a flat area with gentle slopes and protective shrubs. The rancher guided the horse into the center, allowing the girl to rest again. He spoke softly, reassuring her that this was temporary, that they would continue to safety soon. Her eyes met his, filled with quiet gratitude and a hint of relief. The desert grew cooler as the sun set, the sky turning shades of orange, pink, and deep purple. The rancher knew that the night could bring dangers of its own, but he also knew that stopping now was necessary. They needed to regain strength for the final push. He set up a small area to rest, carefully tying the horse nearby and keeping a vigilant eye on the surroundings. Bask. Sitting next to the girl, he watched her sleep for a moment, her chest rising and falling steadily. The journey had been difficult, but it had also created a bond between them. She had trusted him when she could have feared him, and he had chosen to protect her despite the cost. That choice, he realized, had already changed something in both of their lives. As the first stars appeared in the night sky, the rancher reflected on the day. He had given up something valuable, endured physical strain, and faced the uncertainty of the desert. Yet he had gained something far greater. The knowledge that he had saved a life and that trust and courage could overcome fear and danger. He knew the next day would bring new challenges, but he felt ready. The girl's life depended on him, and he would not fail her. He adjusted the makeshift bandage once more, ensuring it was secure, and whispered softly, "Rest now. Tomorrow we continue." "You're safe with me." The girl stirred slightly, giving a small nod, and then settled back against him. In the quiet of the desert night, surrounded by the vast expanse of hills and stars, the rancher felt a sense of peace. They had survived the first stage of a dangerous journey, and together they would face whatever lay ahead. The first light of dawn crept slowly across the desert, brushing the rugged hills and sparse vegetation with a soft, golden glow. The cool night air had faded, replaced by the gentle warmth of morning. The rancher had stayed awake for a while, keeping watch over the girl as she slept. Her breathing was steady, and for the first time in many hours, her face looked calm and peaceful. He had been tense through the night, listening for any sounds of danger, the rustle of animals, the distant echo of footsteps. But the desert had remained quiet, as if it, too, respected the small miracle of survival. When she stirred, opening her eyes slowly, the rancher smiled gently. "Good morning," he said softly. "Did you sleep well?" The girl gave a faint nod, blinking against the light, her voice still too weak to speak. He offered her water, which she accepted, sipping carefully. Every small action felt significant, a sign that she was regaining strength. They did not stay in the clearing for long. He knew the desert could be dangerous at any time, and they needed to move to a safer place where she could recover fully. He helped her back onto the horse, supporting her carefully as she adjusted herself in the saddle. She leaned slightly against his back, still too weak to hold herself upright entirely, but she was steady enough for them to continue. As they traveled, the rancher kept a careful watch on the horizon. He knew the girl's family might have been searching for her, and he wondered if they would be near. The thought both comforted and worried him. Comforted because she might have family nearby to take her in. Worried because he did not know how they would react to a stranger helping their child. He had to proceed carefully, with respect and caution. Bend. Hours passed as they navigated the rocky slopes and gentle valleys. The girl's condition had improved slightly, though her arms were still weak and her steps, or rather her ride, was uneasy. Every now and then she would glance up at the rising sun, her dark eyes reflecting a mixture of wonder, relief, and lingering fear. The rancher spoke softly to her, telling her about the land, the wind, and the distant mountains. His words were calm, almost like a song, meant to soothe both her body and her mind. As the sun climbed higher, something unusual caught his eye. Off in the distance, a group of figures appeared on the horizon, moving quickly toward them. At first, he thought they might be travelers or workers crossing the desert, but as they drew closer, he saw that there were 3 young women, their movements hurried, almost frantic. The rancher's heart leapt. He instinctively knew who they were. The girl's sisters. The girl on the horse stiffened. Her eyes widened as recognition flickered across her face. She tried to speak, but her voice failed her. The rancher held her gently, signaling for her to stay calm. He had no idea how the sisters would react. Breaths. Would they be grateful? Angry? Suspicious? He had saved her life, but he was still a stranger to them. A man from outside their family, their tribe. As the sisters approached, the rancher slowed the horse to a stop. He lifted a hand in a gesture of peace. He glances around in the desk. Desk. "I am not here to hurt," he said calmly, though he could see the tension in their eyes even from a distance. "Bay, that is all." The sisters slowed their pace, their faces a mixture of relief and caution. They were young women, strong and alert, clearly capable of defending themselves if necessary. Yet as they drew nearer, their focus shifted entirely to the girl. They could see that she was safe, that her wounds had been tended to, and that she had survived the night. Their expressions softened slightly, though suspicion remained. When they reached the clearing, the rancher carefully helped the girl down from the horse. She stumbled slightly but caught herself, leaning on him for support. The sisters rushed forward, surrounding her with protective, urgent movements. "We were so worried," one of them said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Where have you been? What happened to you?" The girl looked at them, still weak, and then at the rancher, before she spoke softly. He helped me," she said, barely audible. The sisters turned their attention to the rancher, studying him closely. Trespass. Their eyes were cautious, measuring as though trying to understand his intentions. The rancher remained calm, holding out his hands in a non-threatening gesture.
I only wanted to help, he said simply. I found her injured and alone.
I could not leave her there. I did what I could to keep her safe.
For a tense moment, no one spoke. The sisters looked at each other, and then back at the rancher. And finally, one of them stepped forward slightly, her expression softening.
You saved her, she said quietly.
We owe you our thanks. The words were simple, but the emotion behind them was powerful. Relief, gratitude, and a cautious respect filled the air. The rancher nodded, feeling a sense of relief himself. He had acted with the best intentions, but he knew that trust was not given lightly. It had to be earned, and in this moment he felt that a bridge had begun to form between them. The sisters moved closer to tend to their injured sibling. They knelt beside her, inspecting her wounds, cleaning them gently and applying traditional remedies. The girl winced at the cold and the touch, but she did not resist. Her sister's presence was comforting, grounding her in a way that nothing else could. The rancher watched quietly, giving them space. He knew this was their moment, their family reunion, and he did not want to intrude. Yet he also understood the unspoken connection forming between him and the family he had helped. He could feel their gratitude, not just for saving their sister, but for showing respect, care, and courage. As the sisters worked, the girl began to speak softly, explaining bits of her story, how she had been hurt, how she had gotten separated from them, and how she had struggled through the night. Her sisters listened intently, occasionally glancing at the rancher, as if to acknowledge the role he had played. The rancher nodded quietly, encouraging her without speaking over her. Every word, every gesture, deepened the trust between them all. After tending to her injuries, the sisters finally stood and turned to the rancher.
We cannot repay you for what you have done, one of them said, her voice steady and sincere. But you have our gratitude. You have saved her life, and for that, we will never forget you.
She reached into a small pouch at her waist and pulled out a simple token, a piece of handcrafted beadwork, symbolic in their culture. She offered it to him with both hands, a gesture of respect and honor. The rancher accepted the gift with humility. He knew it was more than just a token. It represented trust, respect, and the bond now shared between him and this family. "Thank you," he said quietly. "It was my honor to help her."
I only did what anyone should do.
The sisters nodded, understanding the sincerity in his words. The girl's sisters helped her to stand, supporting her carefully. She looked at the rancher one last time, her eyes filled with gratitude and something deeper, a sense of safety and hope. "Thank you," she whispered. He smiled gently, feeling the weight of the journey lift slightly from his shoulders. The most important part was done. She was safe, surrounded by those who loved her. The sisters guided her back toward their home, a small settlement not far from the clearing. The rancher watched them go, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and quiet melancholy. His last horse, the one he had sacrificed, remained nearby, but it no longer felt like a loss. It had been given for a higher purpose, and that purpose had been fulfilled. The desert around him seemed brighter, more alive, as if acknowledging the bond that had been formed through courage, care, and sacrifice. As the morning progressed, the rancher prepared to return to his own land. He checked the horse one last time, giving it a gentle pat and a word of thanks. The animal had carried them safely through the night and into the safety of dawn. He knew it had earned every bit of his admiration and respect. Before leaving, he glanced back at the sisters and the girl, who were now safely walking toward their home. The young girl waved faintly, her small hand lifted in gratitude. The rancher lifted his own hand in return, a silent promise that he would never forget this moment and that the bond they had formed would remain, even if distance separated them. As he walked back toward his ranch, the desert stretched endlessly before him, bathed in morning light. He thought about the events of the past day, the fear, the struggle, the journey, and the small triumph of human kindness. He knew that life could be harsh and unforgiving, but he also knew that acts of courage and compassion could leave lasting impacts. He felt a quiet warmth in his heart, a sense of fulfillment that no material possession could provide. The journey had tested him in ways he had not expected. He had faced physical challenges, navigated dangerous terrain, and made difficult decisions that required both courage and wisdom. Yet, through it all, he had found something invaluable, the knowledge that helping another human being, without expecting anything in return, could change lives forever. By mid-morning, he reached his ranch. The familiar sight of his small cabin, the grazing horses, and the simple fences brought a sense of comfort. Life would continue as it always had, but something had shifted within him. He had given his last horse for a life, and in doing so, he had gained a deeper understanding of trust, honor, and the quiet strength that comes from selfless action. He settled into his routine, feeding the remaining horses and tending to the land, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the girl and her sisters. He wondered how she was recovering, whether her sisters were caring for her, and how the bond they had formed that morning would influence the days to come. He smiled faintly, knowing that sometimes the most meaningful stories are those that unfold quietly, in moments of care and courage, far from recognition or reward. The desert was alive with the hum of life as the sun climbed higher. Birds called from distant cliffs, the wind whispered through the sagebrush, and the land stretched endlessly, full of possibilities. The rancher paused for a moment, taking in the scene, and realized that the events of the past day had left an indelible mark, not just on the girl and her sisters, but on himself. He had discovered a strength he had not fully known, a courage born not from necessity, but from compassion. In that quiet morning, surrounded by the vast open desert, he understood that life's most important moments are not measured by possessions or achievements, but by the choices made to protect, to care, and to act with integrity. The girl's survival, her trust, and the bond with her sisters were living proof of that truth. And though the journey had been difficult, it had also been rewarding, leaving him with a sense of purpose and connection that would endure long after the sun had set. The desert stretched wide and golden under the rising sun, a vast landscape of rugged hills, scattered shrubs, and the endless blue sky. Above, the rancher walked slowly back toward his land, his boots stirring up small clouds of dust with each step. His body ached from the long days and nights spent helping the young girl, but the ache was nothing compared to the quiet satisfaction filling his chest. He had saved a life. He had faced danger and made a sacrifice, and in return he had gained something far more valuable than any horse or material possession: trust, respect, and a connection that transcended distance and culture. As he neared his small cabin, he thought about the girl and her sisters. They had disappeared from view after returning safely to their settlement. But the image of their faces, the relief, gratitude, and cautious admiration remained vivid in his mind. He wondered how the girl was recovering, whether her sisters were caring for her as tenderly as he had imagined, and how they would remember his part in the ordeal.
The thought brought a faint smile to his lips.
Even if they never spoke of it again, the bond formed in those desperate hours would always exist, unspoken but undeniable. Back at the ranch, life settled into its familiar rhythm. The remaining horses grazed quietly, and the wind carried the scent of sage and earth across the fields. The rancher had lost his last strong horse in the process of saving the girl, but he didn't feel empty. Instead, he felt a quiet pride, knowing that the horse had served its final and most important purpose. Every time he thought of the animal, he remembered its strength, loyalty, and courage, the same qualities that had guided him through the rescue. Days passed, and the memory of the girl and her sisters lingered. He had returned to his work, mending fences, tending to the livestock, and maintaining the routines that had defined his life for so long. Yet, in the midst of these ordinary tasks, he found moments of reflection. He thought about how fragile life could be, how easily circumstances could shift, and how crucial it was to act with kindness and courage when the opportunity arose. The desert had tested him, and in doing so, had taught him lessons he would never forget.
One afternoon, as he repaired a broken fence along the edge of his property, a small figure appeared on the ridge above him.
At first, he squinted against the sun, unsure of who it could be. Then, recognition struck. It was the girl. She walked carefully, supported by one of her sisters, who stayed close to guide and protect her. The rancher's heart lifted. She had recovered enough to travel, to visit, and to show her gratitude personally. He set down his tools and walked toward them, keeping his hands visible in a gesture of peace. The girl's eyes lit up as she saw him, and she ran the last few steps, still weak but determined. She reached him and looked up, her dark eyes shining with trust and gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice stronger than before.
Thank you for saving me. The rancher smiled gently, crouching slightly so he could meet her gaze.
"You don't need to thank me," he said. "I only did what anyone would do. You were hurt, and I couldn't leave you." She looked down for a moment, then back up at him, her expression thoughtful. "Bow."
You didn't just save my life, she said quietly. You gave me hope.
Bay. Inside were handmade crafts, tokens of respect and gratitude from their family. The rancher accepted them with humility, understanding the deep cultural significance behind the gifts. They represented trust, honor, and the bond now shared between him and the family. "I will treasure these," he said sincerely. But the real gift was seeing you safe and well. Over the next few hours, they sat together, sharing stories and laughter. The girl recounted her recovery, how her sisters had cared for her, and how she had dreamed of this reunion with the rancher who had saved her life. Band. The rancher listened, humbled and quietly amazed at her resilience. Despite the hardships she had faced, she spoke with courage, dignity, and a wisdom beyond her years. The sisters, too, shared their gratitude, telling him about the concern and fear that had gripped them while searching for their sibling, Bay.
They spoke of how the community had come together, supporting one another in small but meaningful ways, and how the rancher's actions had inspired them.
Every word they spoke strengthened the quiet connection that had begun in the desert, a bond formed through courage, sacrifice, and mutual respect. As the afternoon sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert floor, the rancher knew it was time for them to leave. The girl and her sisters had more obligations to their family and community, and he had work to return to. But the farewell was not sorrowful. It was full of understanding and unspoken promises.
I will always remember what you did, the girl said softly, her hand brushing lightly against his arm in a gesture of thanks.
The rancher nodded, feeling a warmth in his chest that no hardship or loss could diminish. "And I will remember you," he said quietly. "Stay safe and take care of one another." With that, they turned and began the journey back toward their settlement, the desert stretching endlessly around them, bathed in the golden glow of evening light. In the days that followed, life on the ranch continued with its familiar rhythm, yet the events of that sunrise had left an indelible mark on the rancher's heart. He found himself reflecting on the lessons learned.
The value of courage, the importance of compassion, and the profound impact that a single act of kindness could have. Each time he looked over the hills, imagining the girl and her sisters walking safely home, he felt a sense of fulfillment that no material possession could ever provide. The rancher also noticed subtle changes in himself. He approached his work with renewed patience and care, his interactions with neighbors and visitors marked by an unspoken understanding of the fragility and preciousness of life. His reputation in the community grew quietly, not because he sought recognition, but because people noticed the integrity and courage that guided his actions. The story of the young girl's rescue spread slowly, carried by those who had witnessed it, and it became a quiet testament to the power of selfless action and human kindness. Months passed, and the girl occasionally returned to the ranch with one of her sisters, bringing gifts of food, handmade crafts, and stories of their lives. Each visit was a reminder of the bond formed in the desert, a connection that transcended cultural and geographical boundaries. The rancher welcomed them warmly, always mindful of the respect and trust that had been earned. Together they shared laughter, stories, and the simple joy of human connection, proving that courage and compassion could bridge even the widest divides. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, painting the desert in brilliant shades of orange and pink, the rancher reflected on the journey that had begun with the rescue. He remembered the fear in the girl's eyes, the pain she endured, and the courage she showed. He remembered the long hours guiding the horse through treacherous terrain, the sacrifices made, and the bond that had formed through mutual trust and care.
And he realized that, despite the challenges, the experience had enriched his life in ways he could never have anticipated.
He thought about the lessons that the desert had taught him, that true courage is not measured by physical strength alone, but by the willingness to act with integrity and compassion. That trust is fragile but can be built through consistent care and respect, and that the bonds formed in moments of crisis often endure far longer than those formed in comfort and ease. These lessons would stay with him forever, guiding his actions, shaping his character, and reminding him of the quiet power of kindness. As night fell over the desert, the rancher looked out across the hills and valleys, imagining the girl and her sisters safe in their home, their lives continuing with renewed hope and security. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that he had played a part in their story, and that his actions had created ripples of trust, gratitude, and lasting connection. He returned to his cabin, tending to the remaining horses and preparing for the days ahead. Yet in his heart, the events of the past weeks remained vivid and alive. The sunrise that had marked the beginning of the rescue, the long journey across the desert, the arrival of the sisters, and the quiet moments of gratitude.
They were etched into his memory, a constant reminder of what it meant to act with courage, integrity, and compassion.
In the quiet stillness of the desert night, under a sky filled with stars, the rancher felt a sense of peace that only comes from knowing that one has done what is right. He had given his last horse, faced danger and navigated uncertainty, all to save a life. And in doing so, he had discovered something profound. That the true measure of a person is found not in wealth or possessions, but in the choices made to protect, to care, and to act with honor. The girl's life had been saved, her trust secured, and her family's gratitude expressed in ways that would never be forgotten. The rancher had made a sacrifice, yet he had gained a deeper understanding of human connection and the quiet strength that comes from selfless action. Rest. And as he lay down to rest that night, the desert calm and silent around him, he knew that this story of courage, sacrifice, and trust would remain with him forever, a testament to the enduring power of kindness and the bonds that form when hearts act with bravery and love. In the weeks and months that followed, the rancher continued his work, tending to the land and his remaining animals, but always carrying with him the memory of that sunrise. The girl and her sisters became a symbol of resilience and hope, reminders that even in the harshest conditions, humanity and compassion
could shine brightly. And each time he gazed toward the hills where they had first met, he smiled quietly, knowing that the small acts of courage and care had created ripples that would last far beyond that single, unforgettable morning.